checking off boxes so I'm clear who is represented. We don't yet have, we know we're going to have Senator Tipping arrive in about an hour. Penny Jordan, we don't yet have. Hi, Abby. And Abby's filling in today for Shelley at Maine Farmland Trust. We have Arthur. Do we have Juana or Sean yet? No. Mike Where? Not yet. All right, so there's an echo, which typically happens when.
I just got off the phone with Juana a few minutes ago. I believe she will be here.
And is anybody connected by phone? And are you still hearing an echo? Okay, so something shifted.
Everybody should be on mute if they're not speaking. That might help.
Yeah, if everyone could go on mute. And are you hearing it now? No more echo? Okay, great. Thank you, whoever changed. We've got Holly. We've got Heather. Hi to both of you. Do we have Heath? Oh, no, do we have Heath Miller?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Heath. Eric, nice to see you. Matt, you as well. And so we're missing, so sorry, Tom, you said you spoke with Juana earlier?
I was just on the phone with her about 10 minutes ago. Yeah, so I believe she will be here.
Okay, so we'll go ahead without Senator Tipping for the time being, without Juana for the time being, and I think that is it.
No, also, oh, here we go.
Who else have I overlooked? Was there someone else?
Ware.
Oh, right, Mike Ware. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Well, I will pass it off to both Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner for opening remarks.
I don't have much to say other than welcome back, everybody. Thanks for being here for meeting number 4. We have a very packed schedule today. So let's just dive right in and have a good, productive conversation. Thank you.
That sounds great, Nancy. I agree. We do have a packed agenda. Jody, I'm just wondering if you did kind of a roll call, but this is being taped and broadcast, and I'm just wondering if we should do just a quick round of introductions so that people who may be joining for the first time or looking at this after we're done know who people represent.
Or would you like me to just call off the names so nobody's guessing who should go next?
Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, you want to start first? And somebody's just joined without being on mute. I'm going again. Okay. Commissioner?
Here, I'm here, Deputy Commissioner McBurney.
Okay, and Laura Fortman, Commissioner of the Department of Labor.
And in the Speaker's office.
Tom Harnett from the Speaker's office.
Thanks. And I'll just say that we did get word from Senator Tipping that he'll be arriving in about an hour. So next, do we have Penny Jordan yet? Not yet. And when she does join, if she does join, she'll be representing the Maine Farm Bureau. Maine Potato Board.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Tapley, Assistant Executive Director for the Maine Potato Board.
The Wild Blueberry Commission.
Afternoon, I'm Eric Venturini. I'm the Executive Director of the Wild Maine.
Maine Dairy Industry.
Good afternoon. I'm Heath Miller, representing Maine Dairy Industry Association.
And MAFCA.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Spalding, representing Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, MAFGA.
Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company.
Holly Francis with Passamaquoddy Wild.
Maine AFL-CIO.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Schlobo. I'm Executive Director with the Maine AFL-CIO.
I'll jump back up to Maine Farm Bureau.
Oh, I'm sorry, Penny Jordan.
Thanks. Pine Tree Legal Assistance Farm Worker Unit.
Hi, I'm Mike Ware from Pine Tree Legal.
Maine Center for Economic Policy.
Good afternoon, Arthur Phillips, Maine Center for Economic Policy.
And we don't yet have someone from Mono. We do. Sorry.
Ana Rodriguez Vasquez from Mano and Mano.
Thanks. And Maine Farmland Trust.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Farnham with Maine Farmland Trust, filling in for Shelley McGuire.
Great. Thank you all. A quick review, as we do at the beginning of every meeting, of the working agreements. Excuse me. You'll have noted that the meeting has begun to be recorded a couple of minutes ago, and we post all recordings to this committee's website. And all meetings are public, and therefore all comments are on the record. We're doing our best to start every meeting on time, and we will definitely end on time. And as we're meeting all remotely today, when we do meet in person, we're trying to make every effort to do so, just to facilitate learning and communication and collaboration. As best we can, we're asking everyone to keep their cameras on unless their bandwidth is limited, just again, while we're on online meetings, so that you know, we all communicate in different ways, some of them verbal and some of them nonverbal, so that can be helpful for us to see you if possible. And we've been doing our best, and I think fulfilling this, to share meeting materials in advance to give you ample time to review those. We're asking in return that you come prepared, having read it, and hopefully have some thoughts about it. And while you're here, be as present and engaged as possible. So hard to tell, and you've got screens in front of you, but if you can limit that, that would be helpful. And we're trying to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to weigh in. So to limit your time if you tend to talk a lot, and jump in if you tend not to. We're listening with curiosity and openness to understanding something that we don't yet. And since we're working toward a goal of developing at least the framework for legislation, we're adopting a creative problem-solving orientation. We know we're going to be disagreeing on a number of matters on this call, and as we do at all meetings likely. So we're trying to name that tension and do it in a kind way. And humor is always welcome. I did see the speaker join the call, so just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, thank you very much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Talbot Ross. I represent House District 118, which is part of Portland on the Peninsula, and currently serve as Speaker of the House. Grateful to be able to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll turn us just at a high level to the desired outcomes for the day. And we, as you recall from the last meeting, talked about doing a dive into piecework. And so we'll have the benefit of a presentation from Holly and Eric on that, as well as from the Department of Labor. We'll also be talking about ways in which we'll be getting a presentation as well. We're very grateful for this from the agricultural on ag labor statistics from the National Agricultural Statistics Service. They've been very kind to provide information to us, so they'll be jumping on in about an hour, and there'll be ample opportunity for conversation. You may recall that a number of disparate questions came up at the last meeting, and so we've made some attempt to gather information to respond to those. And then we'll be speaking about a way in which we might get sort of candid feedback from both farm workers and farmers on this issue. So we'll end with that after getting public input. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Commissioner Fortman to review the questions that were raised at the last meeting or requests for information.
Sure, thanks, Jody. And according to our notes, there were 3 key questions that were asked at the last meeting. One was from Tom Harnett about whether housing costs could be considered of the primary benefit to the employer and therefore not eligible for a credit if the employer needed to offer housing in order to secure workers due to labor market conditions. So we spent some time digging into that a little bit. And although there is not a clear black and white answer to it, we have looked at cases where even in situations where employers offering housing was really an industry standard, the housing is still found to be of primary benefit to the worker and the credit is allowed, always assuming that the other criteria has been met. Some courts have viewed the test partially through a lens of whether the expense in question is more like a business expense, such as tools or equipment, or more like a personal expense, like meals or housing. So expenses that are closer to a business expense are more likely to be found to be of primary benefit to the employer, and those that are more akin to a personal expense are more likely to be found to be of primary benefit to the worker. So we believe that generally speaking, the housing credit would be deemed to be of primary benefit to the worker. Another question that we received last time we met was from Matt Schlobaum about the timing for the mandatory overtime. You know, when are we saying, what is 2 consecutive weeks? When does the timing start? When does it end? So the language that's used in the statute applies the limit of overtime in any 2 consecutive week period. So when we looked at that, we're saying it would not be a rolling day to day. It would be looked at in a 1 week period, which is how we normally examine the smallest increments of looking at wages. So for example, if Wage and Hour was reviewing time records for a 4-week period, that would cover 3 consecutive 2-week periods. So we'd look at that 4 weeks, and the first chunk would be week 1 and 2. The next time we would look at it would be week 2 and 3. The week after that would be 3 and 4. And that would be whether or not the worker had exceeded 160 hours in any of those 3 periods. Does that make sense? Okay, and then Eric, you had a question around what enforcement authority would change, particularly around records and access to records, if the exemption from subchapter 3 was removed. And basically what it does is MDOL would have enforcement authority over minimum wage, which it currently does not because of the exemption. In terms of records, and I think we've provided some slides at an earlier meeting about this, the records are basically records that MDOL already has access to under section 622. And basically it was that difference that we had talked about before. about the pay stub versus the more generic record keeping. We currently do not require records showing the exact amount on the pay stub. But I see Penny's got a question, and if others have questions, I'm hoping that Ann Macri can jump in here and also help me out on this. But Penny?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't find my raised hand function till after you moved on to the next question, but going back to the consecutive weeks, and just so I can wrap my head around it, are you using weeks as Monday through Sunday? Because our payroll week is a Thursday through Wednesday. So when you take a 4-week, so that's why you take a 4-week period in order to capture those nuances of a pay week? Or do we have to always think of Monday through Sundays or Sunday through Mondays? Is that an odd question?
It's not an odd question. It's a very reasonable question, Penny. And I know what my answer would be, but I defer to Anne to jump in here. But I would, so I'll shut up and I'll let Anne.
Okay. There is not a dictated pay week, right? So it's not a specific, employers have discretion to sort of set the pay week as they see fit, as makes sense for your business. In the context of the limits on mandatory overtime, we're looking at the consecutive 2-week period. That week or those 2 weeks would be whatever the employer has set as their pay week, right? Sometimes it may be a pay period. An employer might use a biweekly pay period. But because that language in the statute is using the term week, and any consecutive 2-week period, it's not necessarily always going to line up with that pay period, right? So if you have a biweekly pay period, it could be that the consecutive 2-week period that's at issue is actually the last week of one pay period and the first week of another pay period. But in terms of what day it starts on, any 7-day period, as long as it's, you said it's consistent, is it within the discretion of the employer.
Are there other questions about any of the 3 topics that Commissioner covered? Okay. All right. Well, that's great. Then let's move on. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 2 presentations here. And Holly and Eric, I wasn't sure, are you wanting to share your screen, or did you hope that we would handle that on our end, whatever you prefer?
I can share my screen, Jody.
Okay, go right ahead.
I think somebody needs to enable.
Oh, sorry about that. Dylan, you good with that?
Yep, just made you a co-host, Eric, so you should have that power now.
Thanks, Dylan.
Needing any help with that? Do you need any assistance with this, Eric, or is it just taking its time?
Before, it's just being a little funky.
We did receive that final presentation from you, and so
Oh, wait,
really,
here it is. I got it. I got it now.
Okay.
Sorry.
okay. We can see your screen now.
Okay. All right, how's that? Can you see the entire presentation?
It's
Yes,
not on
but-
the present.
Yeah, if you want to present.
Not on present mode.
No.
No, it's just on the PowerPoint.
Good, folks. How's that?
Great. Yeah, that's perfect.
All right. So first of all, I'm Eric Venturini. I'm Executive Director of the Wild Blueberry Commission of Maine, and I'm going to be giving this presentation with Holly Francis.
I'm Holly. I'm the product manager for the Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company. For those of you who don't know, we're a 2,000 acre wild blueberry farm in Maine, and fully
Holly, you
owned
might
and
need to-
operated by the Passamaquoddy tribe.
So sorry, Holly, you might want to turn off your video just so that we can hear you better. You're breaking up a little bit.
Sure.
Before we get too far into the presentation, I just wanted to sincerely thank the co-chairs, Commissioner Fortman and Deputy Commissioner McBrady, also Jody and Dylan, for allowing us to give this presentation. So thank you. I will take this opportunity for granted, and I'm very grateful that you were able to make room for it on the agenda. I hope that through this short presentation, you'll learn a bit about how piecework is currently used in our industry. You see, in the course of thinking about piece rate in the industry, and as this legislation has evolved, I've come to realize that there are two kinds of wild blueberry rakers: those that are here for the money and those that are here for the culture and the tradition. Both types of rakers are employed by farms across this industry. During the course of the presentation, we'll first answer the question, what is piecework? We'll share a slide on piecework in New England, and then we'll talk about some of the benefits of piecework and give some examples of how it works in wild blueberry. Finally, we'll try to demonstrate to you how this payment system is a cultural tradition for this industry. First off, piecework defined. We did have a definition up here from the Maine Department of Labor, but I couldn't verify it. So if the Maine Department of Labor has another definition, that'd be great. But according to the Cambridge Dictionary, piecework is work for which the amount of pay depends on the number of things finished rather than the time spent making them. Any questions on that? Piecework in New England. Federal law requires that piecework workers make at least federal minimum wage, which is currently set at $7.25 an hour. Plus, $7.25 is the least amount of money that workers can earn when harvesting on piecework. The average earnings for piecework are easily 2 to 5 times the federal minimum floor, and the floor in New England is generally set at or close to the federal minimum wage. So Maine's current floor for piece rate is $7.25. This is also true in New Hampshire and in Vermont and in Rhode Island. Massachusetts, the floor is slightly higher. Piecework agricultural workers have to make at least $8 an hour. And in Connecticut, it's $15, significantly higher, $15, but $12.75 for ag workers that are 14 to 18 years old. Well, I don't have comparable numbers for other New England states. The 2021 UMaine Extension Survey found that 10% of ag workers on surveyed farms are piece workers. And the same survey identified strawberries, wild blueberries, apples, and peas as sectors that utilize piece rate. I expect that there's some broccoli and potato producers also, but I don't have any data to back that up. Why use piece rate? First, the piecework system dramatically increases the earning potential of workers. In fact, peer-reviewed published studies have found that workers prefer piece rate over hourly wages because they can make more money in less time. Second, farming is a risky profession. Growers are always at the whim of Mother Nature, which may provide for a 100,000-pound harvest in one year and a 5,000-pound harvest the next. Despite its risk, farming is the most important profession on earth, growing the food that people can eat. And with this level of uncertainty, farmers prefer to tie their expenses to their earnings. So paying agricultural workers on a per unit harvested basis does just that. If you have a great crop, you'll pay a lot in worker wages, but you can afford it. If you have a bad crop, you'll pay out little. So producers are paying for the harvested product, not just the time spent in the field. And this system helps farms survive uncertainty. And that system requires a low floor for piece rate. The piecework system with a low floor allows workers to harvest at their own pace, and it minimizes the need for constant oversight and supervision. This benefits the workers because who wants someone looking over their shoulder all the time? And it benefits the farmer who has less need of field bosses. And finally, the piecework system with a low floor incentivizes performance. This high level of performance enables producers to get their crop harvested during the short harvest season, and it minimizes loss from crops that weren't harvested on time. So now we'll turn over to some examples, some more specific examples and numbers from the industry. Holly will take the next several slides here. So,
All right, I changed from headphones to my computer. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. So this is just a brief overview of how hand raking and piece rate works for Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company specifically. We as a company hire our harvest supervisors, also formerly known as leaseholders. And then these supervisors are actually responsible for hiring their own crews. So last year we had about 150 rakers and we had 2 harvest supervisors. So those supervisors are responsible for ensuring their crew fills out all the paperwork required for payroll, completes all of the trainings that are required, and things like that. So then when you actually get into the fields and raking begins, the rakers determine their own start time. We're not dictating to them what time they need to get out in the fields. Some rakers like to get out before sunrise and they rake until it gets too hot, so about midday. Other rakers want to start later, and this flexible scheduling really supports that worker autonomy in the fields. And then our supervisors, you'll actually see in this picture, one of the supervisors from a few years ago, tallying the boxes. They tally by hand, and then those tallies are brought to our bookkeeper each night, and our bookkeeper manually inputs those into payroll. If we can go to the next slide. Eric. Thank you. And then just an overview of hand raking, again, for PWBC. These are our numbers specifically. The pay varies for boxes from $2.75 to $3 a box. It depends on if you're raking conventional berries or organic. That's because the organic berries are typically harder to rake. There's more weeds in the field and it takes longer to get the boxes. So we do pay a premium on those. On average, it takes about 10 minutes to harvest a single box of berries. So that's about 6 boxes an hour. If you break that down to the lower wage rate, it's $16.50 an hour for the average worker. Last year, we paid out an average gross wage of just under $1,000 a raker. And then I knew the question would come up. Had we just paid hourly rates, it would have been about $755 for the gross wages for those workers. And our highest earner earned about $7,000. Lowest earner earned $55, which was a total of 20 boxes raked. And then just a little fact to throw in there, our hand rakers actually have a better yield per acre than our mechanical harvesters do. Much better yield per acre. And then to speak to the tradition of the Wabanaki tribes. So the Wabanaki tribes are composed of the tribes in Maine. They mean people of the dawn. So it's Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, Micmac, Maliseet, and Abenaki. Each year we have members of these Wabanaki tribes traveling to our barrens because we're the only Native American owned wild blueberry farm in Maine. And so last year we had almost 50 Micmac members come over from Canada to rake the berries. And so these people travel to spend time with their families and enjoy the communal living. We have some of our elders rake in the fields for a day or two and share their stories and their memories of, what raking was like back in my day, and continuing on the tradition with the next generations. And to show how important the hand raking tradition is to the Wabanaki tribes, if our goal were to harvest the fastest and in the cheapest way possible, we would just switch everything to mechanical harvesting, using tractors to harvest. But this tradition and this this experience is way too important for the Wabanaki people. If we were to, we can go to the next slide, Eric. This is just what would happen to us specifically if we were to raise that base. It wouldn't really impact our good producing rakers, the ones who are, you know, making the most money. It would, however, impact those lower producing rakers if we were to impose this strict quota to ensure rakers are raking enough berries to validate us paying them the minimum wage, the Maine state minimum wage. Specifically, it would impact our elders who travel to participate, but they don't necessarily have the stamina to meet or exceed these quotas we would have to implement. And then furthermore, we wouldn't be able to hire those less productive employees. And then if we didn't hire those less productive employees, as I mentioned before, people come with families, it would likely impact our ability to bring all of those employees and all of those people who want to rake if an elder couldn't come and rake for us. And then I have a quote here from a tribal member at Sapayak, which is one of the Passamaquoddy reservations in Maine. To impose strict quotas would harm people who didn't have the stamina to meet or exceed quotas, specifically our elders who have seen in their lifetimes brothers, sisters, friends, and families removed from their communities and stripped of their heritage. Harvesting wild blueberries is one of the traditions that has endured. I will send it back over to Eric to give a perspective from another wild blueberry grower who is not tribal, but in the same industry.
Thanks, Holly. So Lisa Hanscom is the owner and farmer at Welch Farm in Rope Bluffs, Maine. Lisa's the sixth generation to run the farm. She works side by side with her father, Wayne, each and every day. Family has commercially harvested wild blueberries on that farm for about 100 years, and they currently do so on about 300 acres. So I asked Lisa last week about her harvesting wages and about piecework. She explained to me that there's two kinds of rakers. And this is what I mentioned earlier on at the top of this presentation. There's those that come to make money, and there's those that come for the tradition. And I think this is true in the Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company, and it's also true with the individual farms that form up this industry as well. Because raking wild blueberries is part of Maine's culture, raking wild blueberries by the piece is sort of a rite of passage for many Mainers. It's a stamp of pride, really. And some of you in this room have had a part in that tradition yourselves. I know Senator Tipping has. I don't know if he's joined the call yet. I'm sure it was formative to his experience and his trajectory. Lisa's point was that some people, in fact, generally about half of her rakers, 50%, although in 2022 it was 2/3, 66%, aren't really there to make thousands of dollars in a few short weeks. They are perhaps maybe past their prime, maybe they're elders, maybe they've been coming to the same field for half a century, maybe they're very young and just coming in and don't know much about how to rake efficiently. They do still contribute to the harvest. Some of them are there because their parents said it would be good for them, and trying to get their children to see the value of hard work. So those folks that are there for the tradition, for the experience, if Lisa had to pay at least state minimum wage, you simply wouldn't be able to hire them. Changing the floor will change harvesting from a tradition and force it to be solely a business decision. Lisa's making a business of her farm, yeah, but that's not why she's farming. She does not want to have to not hire people that have become part of her family because they can't rake, say, 5 boxes an hour. But let's look at the numbers here on the table to the right. Lisa divided her 2022 workforce into two categories for me. Those that were there for the money, which is just 2 rakers, and those that were there for the tradition and culture, which was 4. Lisa estimates that she spent a little over $5,000 on payroll for the 4 traditional rakers, each of whom spent 70 hours raking about 20% of her field, and about $11,200 on the 2 high-earning rakers that each spent about 110 hours raking the other 80% of her field. Neither category of worker raked 8 hours in any given day. On average, Lisa estimated that the 4 rakers there for the tradition grossed about $64 a day. The 2 there to earn money grossed about $280 a day. Holly made it clear that piece rate work with a low hourly floor is an important part of the raking tradition and culture for the Passman Wild Blueberry Company. And Lisa told me the same thing. Sometimes raking blueberries is not about raking blueberries. It's about being there with your friends, being there with your family, being outside, culture and the tradition, learning what hard work is. If I had to pay state minimum wage as the floor for piece rate, estimate that I wouldn't be able to hire 50% of my rakers. We know kids who will experience raking and being out there and being part of the farm. Instead, it removes those here for the experience of raking and changes it solely into business transaction. You can hire a migrant crew and a crew boss and have the whole field raked in a day or two. That's not why she's in business. A crew boss would cost her thousands of dollars per season for someone to stand there and keep people working. Her farm would lose its ability to carry on the tradition and culture, letting people come back, old family friends, anyone who wants to rake and experience the tradition now can. With that, we have a last slide here, which is really a recommendation to the committee to consider how we could give ag workers minimum wage while still maintaining a functioning piece rate system, which is an important part of Maine's wild blueberry tradition and culture. I'll leave it here if there's any questions.
Sorry, I was chatting to myself on mute. Eric, Holly, thank you so much. And why don't you stop screen sharing for a moment and see if there are, maybe just very briefly now, because we'll have more opportunity to circle back to this, but see if there are kind of brief questions now on any aspect of this presentation. And we're going to move on to the Department of Labor component of piece rate. And yeah, questions for Holly or Eric? Seeing any. So why don't we shift over to DOL, and we're hearing from Scott Cotmar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me attend this meeting. My name is Scott Codmar. I'm the director of the Wage and Hour Division. My division enforces Maine's labor laws. I just have a very short presentation. Bear with me while I hopefully get it, share my screen and get it on here for you. Now, are you seeing the slide? Are you seeing presenter mode or in the presenter mode? Okay.
Yeah, looks great.
All right. So as I stated, I'm the director of the Wage and Hour Division for the Maine Department of Labor. What is piece rate? Piece rate is, as Eric pointed out, it's a method of paying employees by the unit produced and not solely on the time spent working. Right now, employees can be paid piece rate, but employers are still required to keep a true and accurate record of the hours worked to ensure that minimum wage is being met at the end of the week. Piece rate is not necessarily unique to agriculture. It became popular during the Industrial Revolution back around the mid-19th century. Currently, there are numerous industries that use the piece rate method. Manufacturing garment industries paid by the widget produced or the garment produced. Call centers, numerous call centers around, pay employees either by the outgoing calls made or the incoming calls received, depending on the call center. Writing and translation services, reporters, employees working to translate documents into different languages, typically paid by either on a character basis, paid by on a word basis, or paid by on a per page basis. truck driving. Truck driving has been utilizing piece rate method for several years. Oftentimes drivers are paid on a per mile basis. Data entry, individuals that data enter information into computer systems, typically paid on a per character basis. Again, it's a piece rate method. Cleaning, housekeeping. People may not realize that housekeeping in hotels, motels, camps and such are often paid on a per room basis. So they get a rate per room cleaned. Again, a method of piece rate. Here are some examples. Employers can pay a piece rate now, but at the end of the week, they just need to show that what the employee received in total wages meets at least a minimum wage standard for the total hours that they worked. An example of an apple farm that pays $1.50 a bushel. Jane worked 5 hours and picked 50 bushels. We've got, straightforward math. 50 bushels times $1.50, she earned $75 that day. She worked 5 hours. Her average hourly rate amounted to $15 an hour. You get a blueberry farm that pays $2 per pint. The individual picked 80 pints in a day, earned a gross wage of $160. But in this case, the employer didn't keep a record of the hours worked. There's no way to verify that minimum wage was met for that particular day or by the end of that particular week. Strawberry farmer pays $1 per pound. An individual picks 60 pounds worth of strawberries and worked 4 hours in the day. What is that worker's hourly rate? Again, the basic math. $1 a pound, pick 60 pounds, $60 divided by the total number of hours worked. This individual earned an average of $15 per hour. Over the week, this worker put in a total of 30 hours and picked 420 pounds of strawberries. What's the average hourly rate for the week? 420 pounds at $1 a pound is $420 divided by the total hours worked. She averaged $14 an hour. Minimum wage was met. If the individual only picked 390 pounds, what happens? Her average hourly rate, 390 divided by the 30 hours worked. She averaged only $13 an hour, and today minimum wage is $13.80 per hour. What would the strawberry farmer have to do? So if the total piece rate at the end of the week doesn't equal minimum wage, the employer would be obligated to pay the difference of what the piece rate is versus what the minimum wage is. In this case, minimum wage is $13.80 an hour right now. For 30 hours, the minimum wage would be $414. So the difference would be the $414 for minimum wage minus what the worker earned at piece rate. She would be owed an additional $24 for the work performed. An employer, so now employers obligated to keep a true and accurate reflection of the actual time worked. If the worker is out in the field, whether it's the worker that's there to make as much money as possible, or it's the worker to keep tradition and socialize and build community. If the worker that's there that's picking less, but being more of a social event, at the end of the day, they should just report how many hours they worked, not how many hours they were in the field, but how many hours did they work? Were they out there for 8 hours, but 2 hours of the time they were having conversations, socializing, and talking about community with the people next to them? If that's the case, they worked 6 hours instead of the 8. Again, let me stop sharing. That is what I have for a presentation, and bear with me. I guess I can't see where I stopped sharing my screen.
If you hit escape so you get out of whole screen mode, you'll likely see a banner at the top that allows you, oh, sorry, at the bottom, the share screen button. You can click on that and get out of it. And while you work on that, let's see if anybody has, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you for helping me.
Yeah. So thank you for the presentation to all three of you, and questions that you may have that have come up as a result of Scott's slides. Okay. All right. Well, then what I think we'll do is move on to the next presentation. Be a bulk of time after that. Oh, go ahead, Matt. And then Penny.
Well, so I have two things. One, I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear. First, that in your example, Scott, just so we're all on the same page about the current distinction. So for the industries you named, truck driving, house cleaning, others, where there, in some cases, is a piece rate system, there is a requirement that the minimum wage be met on the whole. In agriculture, that is currently not the case because of the exemption, correct?
Correct. You are
Okay,
correct.
great. And then this
So
is an
can I just clarify there though, Matt? Under the current law, as Eric did point out, the federal minimum wage must be met. So it's not that no minimum wage, the federal.
Right, 750, not the 1380. Yep, got that. And then I guess one question for Team MDOL. I mean, I guess I'd be curious qualitatively what you can say about, and this doesn't have to be for right now, but just the enforcement work of this employment model. It strikes me a little bit as I know the restaurant industry in some ways a little bit better than the specifics of piecework. And I know it's just it's a nightmare to enforce, right? Like the tipping system, and has someone's full wages met minimum wage? How is that paid? Like all the dimensions of that. So I'd be curious to know sort of what we know currently about the general practices of enforcement around piecework in sectors that are utilizing it, what sort of the research and data tells us. And then, just thinking about the implications of that for us.
Sure. Anything that we want to comment, respond now, follow up. Fine. And I saw, Penny, you did have your hand up, but it went down, so I'm going to take Tom.
Thank you, Jody. Oops, I can wait.
Covered my question.
Yeah, Penny's all set, so go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. And this actually, it's a question about one of Eric's slides, and I don't know if I have the numbers correct, but you were talking about the average daily wage of a traditional harvester, and then a harvester who's there to make as much money as possible. And I think it was $64 a day for the traditional, and about $200 a day for, let's say, a professional raker. And I'm curious as to how many hours that traditional worker was working in a day to earn that money, and if you have that information.
Sure, Tom, that's a great question. The numbers are right. First of all, that was an example from one farm. It is not an industry average by any means. She estimated, on average, I think it was, sometimes as little as 2 hours in a day, and sometimes, 4 or 6 hours in a day for the traditional tradition and culture harvesters. For the for those there to earn money, it was $280 is the estimated gross per day, and they were, she said probably 5 to 6 and a half hours a day. Those are estimates.
Okay.
They're again not industry averages, just a case study from one farm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. One thing I'm gonna suggest, unless there are burning questions right now, so that we have ample time to have additional conversation after the next presentation, is that we move on to that. We've got some folks from the National Agricultural Statistics Service at the ready, so why don't we shift to that next? So Pam, are you
I'm here.
with us?
Yes,
there you
I'm
go.
here. I'm here. I don't have rights to share my screen, Jody, so maybe Dylan needs to give me that. I was going to have that set up, but I don't have rights just yet.
No worries, we'll work on that.
And I'll just take the opportunity to welcome Pam. She will introduce herself and her title, but we reached out last week while doing additional data search and recognized that it made a lot of sense to ask our colleagues from USDA to come and speak to us of the data that they collect nationally and regionally, and walk us through some important data points and allow for some conversation.
Yeah, and I will follow up on that to the minutes, including the executive order in every single packet that you've received prior to each meeting, and that is just to keep us all front of mind. What are the sort of sideboards charge of this committee? And if you'll recall, one of the requirements or stated objectives of the committee was that the committee shall gather data to the extent practicable on wages and benefits currently paid to agricultural workers, including migrant workers. And we've talked at past meetings how that is not easy information to obtain yet, but we did realize that NAS, as it's referred, does have some regional information that could be very helpful. So with that, let me turn it over to Pam.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. I can't see who all is on, so I'm going to introduce myself and then introduce the rest of my team that I believe is on. So I'm Pam Hurd. I am your New England State statistician. I've had the pleasure of meeting quite a few of you in person, and I appreciate all of the efforts that everyone works together to gather responses to NAS surveys on the surveys that we send out, especially Eric with the Wild Maine Blueberries. He and I've worked together quite often. And Nancy, thank you for having us. I appreciate that. I also have King Whetstone on. He is our regional director for the Northeast region. So that includes the New England states, Maryland, Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. So he has a kind of a big job to keeping track of all those states. Then I also have Teresa Varner on, and Teresa is an agricultural statistician out of headquarters. She works in the statistics division, and her specialty is labor. And then I also have Benita Hodge on, and she is a survey statistician out of headquarters in DC as well. And her survey is the Ag Labor Survey. So she's oversees all the administrative functions. So I have the whole team on to hopefully answer any questions you might come up with. And if not, we can certainly be available through email if you have questions later on. So I'm going to jump in. We wanted to kind of mention the information that we can provide you from NAS. And I just kind of wanted to go over what we have available. And so the first thing that we're going to bring up is the Ag Labor Survey. A lot of folks go directly to the Census Survey, but the Census Survey right now is 5 years old. We will be releasing new Census Survey information in February. But right now what we have is 5 years old. So the Ag Labor Survey is conducted every twice a year. And
Pam, are you able to turn this into presentation mode so we see one slide at a time?
Let me, I'd have to stop. Hold on a minute.
It will just make it larger for folks to see.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Okay, can you see that now better?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, yep, okay, sorry about that. So the Ag Labor Survey, as I was mentioning, is conducted twice a year. It's conducted in April and October. It is specific around 4 specific weeks. The information that we collect is the directly hired workers on the farm, the total number of hours worked, and the wages paid for each reference week. We are in the midst right now of the October survey, And we will be releasing the information from that on November 22nd. So that will be in time for this committee to have a look at that and get that information to weigh in on some of your decision making. It will include the annual average estimates at the regional and US levels. And then, of course, the information that we are surveying for. I've also included on here a link that allows you to go to our site that will give you further information on the survey. I did want to mention the sampling. So the census, of course, is a complete survey. It samples, all of the producers that we're aware of, but the labor survey is actually a subsidiary of that. It's a sample survey. So we take, a sample of the full, so it's not a complete census. And then I also did an agricultural, how we define it at NAS. And there were a few things that I just kind of wanted to mention because maybe we think about this and maybe we don't. But bookkeeping, supervision of employees, trips to purchase farm inputs or delivering things to market, building maintenance, equipment repair, working at the roadside stands, and of course, my favorite thing, the equestrian boarding and training. I used to have a farm in Colorado, but boarding and training for horses is also considered agricultural labor. So sometimes it's good just to remember that there's different definitions and to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about labor. Some information on the data collection. Again, I'm going to go through these rather fast because I have some slides that I've been asked to focus on. So I'm going through these rather fast, but you will get a copy of this presentation afterwards that you can explore at your leisure. So this survey is conducted in every state except Alaska. It's mailed in April and October. All the states use the same version, and we sample between 18 and 20,000 around that area for the operations. And then we do 4 one-week periods. And then I listed for you what the 1 week periods are for 2023 and then how the producers respond. Now, who uses the information for the survey? So this one seemed to garner some discussion the other day. So I'm going to spend just a minute on this. The agricultural wage rate is a component of the parity index, and certain rates are used in the establishment of minimum wage rates for domestic and foreign ag workers. The farm worker data are important and they're part of the gross domestic product. And then NAS field and livestock annual average weights, which are published in November, are used by the Department of Labor to set the adverse effect wage rates for each region. So I wanted to mention that. And then the rest of that is just some general information. This I also included, this is public information. This is very, very general about the H-2A workers. Just kind of talks about how you go about hiring them and what you need to do. A question came up the other day when we were doing the preliminary meeting. We don't have any calculations, nor do we have any part of setting visas for this. So I just wanted to make that clear up front. All right, and then here's some additional information about our survey that I just kind of wanted to mention, just so that we're all on the same page. So a couple of things. The Ag Labor Survey doesn't measure all total labor expenditures. That's done during the ARM survey, which will be conducted later this year. It doesn't include the benefits such as housing, meals, or insurance. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is there is a small risk of duplication on this particular survey because farm workers have the tendency to work between multiple operations. There is a possibility that we could sample 2 of the same operations that a farm worker is working in and they could be counted twice. But for the Ag Labor Survey, that is kind of a minimal type of concern because we're only doing 4 one-week periods versus an entire year that we do for the census. So I just wanted to mention that. And then this is where I wanted to mention that our last survey for ag labor was released on May 24th, the information. This was the information that was released. It talks about how many workers, that it's up 5%. Workers directly hired, what the average wage rate was during the April 2023 reference week, the field workers, and this is for the Northeast region. So this would be the New England states but would include New York. So I wanted to mention that. I'm not sure, Jody, did you want me, or Nancy, did you want me to go through every one of these, or kind of just have this up for folks to read through themselves?
I think leaving it up for a moment makes sense. And Jody, you're muted. I'm okay for you to go line by line because this is content heavy and
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I'll just go over it briefly, realizing that if we need to bring these back up later, I'm certainly available to do that. So there were 651,000 workers in the Northeast region, directly hired by farm operators. And again, this is a reference week, right? For the week of April 9th through the 15th. The workers were hired directly by the farm operators. 511,000 during the week of January, because remember, there's 2 reference weeks, so there's a difference, there's a discrepancy there. The farm operators paid their hire workers an average of about $18 an hour during the April 2023 week. That's up 5% from last year, which is a good sign, I think. We're all recovering from COVID still, so I think that's really good. And then the field workers received an average of $17.26 per hour, up 5%, and the livestock workers earned $16.48 per hour, up 4%. Now, my understanding is the wage rate for Maine is $13.80 is what it's kind of set at right now. So as you can see, just as in Eric's example, most of the farm workers were well above that average for your minimum wage. That's really good. I'm sorry, Teresa's saying this is for the US. So the field and livestock worker combined wage rates of $16.99 per hour was up 4%. And then hired laborers worked an average of 40.6 hours, because we all know that we work hard when we're in farming. And then the farmer operators paid their hired workers an average of 18.55 per week during the January reference week, up 5% from the year before. Field workers received an average of 17.67 per hour, up 7%, and the field and livestock worker combined wage rate was 17.26. So I believe the first few bullets has to do with the national, and then I believe the last few, and I can just have King confirm that, the last few have to do with the Northeast region. Okay. This one we haven't released yet. This isn't our annual bulletin. This is all public information. Of course, it's available on our site, but we pulled it all together in our annual bulletin. Nancy, your office will be receiving one pretty shortly. We're putting together the annual bulletin that we do every year, and I try to drop that by all the commissioners' offices and anyone else that's interested in having one. So this will show you for a comparison over multiple years. This is for the Northeast region. It is for regions 1 and 2. So that's all of New England. That's New York. That's New Jersey. That's Pennsylvania and Maryland and Delaware. So that's the information for all of that. I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'll just leave it up for a minute.
Pam, can you advise why there might be S's in some of the columns?
I would think that because they didn't have, again, it would have to do with that confidentiality. And so when they were trying to gather the samples for that, the response rate may have been low. And so they can't release the information for that because it might reveal confidentiality information that we are under law to not share. So.
Yeah, and I would just add, and we put that footnote at the bottom of that release, which it simply says insufficient number of reports to establish an estimate. So we try to define that too in our releases.
Yeah, that's a very incredibly small print at the bottom of the screen, but you'll be able to see it better when you get the PowerPoint presentation yourself.
So, and remind me how many more slides we have.
That's it. So Then I wanted to put on there, I put some links on there so that your team, your committee can go out and easily click on these and pull up this information if they want. Again, I'm mentioning that the Census of Agriculture, the information is 5 years old. It has more specific information for New England region, and the new census data will be released in February of 2024. And then the National Ag Statistics Services, the farm labor, which is what I was just describing, that's the most up-to-date information. That's done on a biannual basis. The next release will be on November 22nd, 2023.
Awesome. Pam, thank you so much. That was a lot of information. And if you could stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
And before I take questions for you and your colleagues, after producing the agenda, we were able to pull a couple of other data points that had to do with labor costs in Maine or in the region. And I believe that DOL has that, and I'm not sure who is presenting that, but it's complementary information from what you just heard from Pam. So I think it could be useful to share that. Who's on point for that?
So Dylan, do you have those slides and can you pull them up?
I do, and
Thanks.
1 second, just gonna share my other screen.
Great. We can see it, but not in presentation mode quite yet.
Bear with me one moment here. How does that look?
Can't see it yet, Dylan.
Oh, it says it's loading. I'm sorry.
Okay, here we go. Since this is incredibly short, I think I'll just have Dylan flip through the slides here. But as Nancy and Jody said, we've been digging into the data. And as we started looking at some of the data from USDA, there were references to the OEWS data. And so we thought it would be important to just provide some background information on that. So this is data from the Department of Labor, and it uses the standard occupational classification system. So these are detailed occupations. And again, as with USDA, this is a sample of Maine businesses that are surveyed. So these are, we're using a federal statistical model. So every state in the country uses the same model, but the data is based on surveys that are responded to by Maine employers. Our little caveat is that this data is not designed to assess whether jobs in a particular occupation are going up or down from one year to the next, because it is based on surveys. And so we may be collecting data from different employers over the years. Next, Dylan. So this is collected throughout the year. So there are several surveys done over the year, and that information can be drilled down by metropolitan area. And something that probably most of the people on here don't either know about or particularly care about is by workforce investment region. So that's how lots of workforce development funds are distributed by workforce investment regions, and that's why we look at that information. The key pieces in here that were pulled, though, were about median hourly wages and annual mean wages. And again, we've included links in here so that you can go to that, dig into this information for yourself. But the two categories that we were looking at were laborers, crop, nursery, and greenhouses. And the median hourly wage there was $18.55 an hour. Farm workers, farm, ranch, and aquaculture was the median hourly wage was $17.31 an hour, and the mean wages were a little bit higher than that. But I think what we mostly wanted to do was to provide this resource for folks and allow you to dig into that a little bit more deeply if you're interested. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think one of the reasons we thought it was important to share that is I think it was one of the only data points that we had that was Maine specific. We have one other that we will share probably just by email because it just came in too late. That's quite similar from an effort, New England, Feeding New England, that also gathered some state-specific wage data. So we can provide that with you shortly. But if I'm recalling, it was roughly quite similar numbers. So with that, again, all the team at NAS, thank you so much, and just want to open it up for questions, comments on all of that you've heard, both from NAS and potentially previously on the piecework presentations.
I think the only question I might ask the group, Jody, is if there are other, I mean, we have done our best to identify data from every source we could identify. Are there pieces of data that we are missing that you think, are relatively, I don't know if I want to say easy to find, but as Jody had pointed out, one of the charges of this group was to gather as much data as was practicable. And if you, as you're thinking about it from your area of expertise, if there's something that we are obviously missing, please flag that for us.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, a question. I want to make sure that I understood something correctly. A question for Eric and Holly, which is, it appeared from one of your slides that you were recommending a minimum wage for farm workers of $12 an hour. Am I understanding that correctly?
Where did you see that?
I thought there was one of your, if I misunderstood what the slide said, then I apologize, but I thought I saw a reference in one of your slides to $12 an hour.
So early on, I presented a slide that gave an overview of basically what's the floor for piece rate work in New England. And Connecticut has an agricultural worker minimum wage, or ag workers are, fall under their normal minimum wage of $15 an hour. For workers that are 14 to 18 years old, they're subject to a $12.75 minimum wage. I'm just laying out what's out there in New England. Right. I wasn't making any recommendations.
I think you may have been looking at the recommendation slide, the last slide that he had put up, where it said minimum hourly wage as of 2020 was $12 per hour, and then it increased. Sure. That was just the current law. That's Eric, I'll let you speak to that slide, but I think that's what he's referencing.
We get that slide back up.
Yeah, I can. Disabled again from sharing.
Sorry about that. Let me give that back to you, Eric.
That's okay.
Or Eric, You could report it out verbally, either way.
Okay, it's just right here.
There you go.
So I just took the existing statute, MRS Title 26, Section 664, Part 1 here. So that $12 an hour is what's already, you know, historically that was starting in January 2020. That's since changed, of course. And all I was recommending is the addition on the bottom, how we could give ag workers a minimum wage while still protecting the cultural tradition of piece rate.
Okay. Okay, so now I have a couple of questions for Eric and Holly. What percentage of blueberry rakers are, and we're thinking specifically about the folks that are raking because of the cultural tradition rather than to make as much money as possible. What percentage of them are unable to make, well, the way it at a piece rate of $3 an hour at a piece rate of $3 a box, $13.80 works out to 4.6 boxes per hour. How many rakers are there out of the workforce who are unable, for whatever reason, to rake 4.5 boxes an hour?
So for us specifically, it'd be about 10%. And like I said, we had 150 rakers last year. Any year that number can go up or down. But it's generally 10% of our rakers are elders, are the tribe's elders, who just can't, you know, what we were trying to portray in this, on our slides, is that we would have to impose that quota you're talking about on those people. And if they had to meet or exceed that quota, that 10% might not be able to.
Thanks, and thanks for asking the question, Mike. And I'd add to that, you know, first, I don't have an industry-wide number. I don't know. But I can tell you from what, you know, Lisa at Welch Farm told me, about half, and in 2022, 66% of her workers were of her piece work rakers were there for the tradition and the experience and the culture. Of those, I don't know what percentage, you know, wouldn't make state minimum wage. I don't know, but I would also say it's a little bit more complicated than that. And Holly might, I don't know if you want to build on this or not, but again, with Lisa's example, sometimes she has families come, and you know, those families might not decide to come if a couple of their members, whether they're very young or, you know, or very old, would not, you know, really make the cut to be hired to be productive rakers. So.
Thank you, Eric. Did you have a follow-up question, Mike?
No.
All right, others?
Oh, go ahead, Abby.
Thanks. I'm curious how the piece rate interacts with workers who participate in the H-2A program. If anyone can speak to that.
Can take a stab, but if there's other folks that are more confident of the answer, they can jump in. But if you're on a farm and you have and that employer hires H-2A workers, they're subject to the adverse effect wage rate, and anyone in their job classification would also have as a floor. So if they're piece rate workers, their floor would be the adverse effect wage rate, provided you have H-2A workers that are also raking. That's my understanding.
And I would agree with that, Eric.
Others. And if this is not helpful, just pretend I didn't ask it, but I am wondering whether this information about piece rate and its potential impact on that industry alters anybody's perspective of what they came in here thinking. I guess, you know, just trying to, I realize we're all being kind of buttoned up and that is natural, but you know, I'm sort of pushing you to express any views that sort of open up new avenues of thinking at all. So go ahead, Heather.
I'm not sure. I guess I'm just feeling concerned about carving out, sectors or categories or classes of people, whatever the appropriate term is generally. But another question I had was about, I thought it was interesting where there was a premium on the harvesting of organic blueberries because it was more challenging because of the the weeds that that the rakers would have to contend with. I was wondering about in conditions where maybe there's not a great yield, but there's still a real need to get out and work in the fields. And I don't know, it just feels like often there is work that needs to be done that is beyond just straight out harvesting. And if conditions weren't optimal for someone to really excel and make more than minimum wage, or were to barely meet the minimum wage, is there anything that the industry does to accommodate that or to allow for that, so that if people are working incredibly hard but still not real, there just isn't the same harvest available to achieve that very high return? I mean, is that taken into account? Maybe that's a question for Eric, but I just wonder, like, the optimum conditions where people are making thousands of dollars, potentially in a day. I mean, that's not always going to be there. So, I mean, just wondering, how do you deal with that and think of it as I mean, clearly you're thinking about the culture and the community and taking care of people, but I just wonder, how does that work?
Thanks, Heather. Holly, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that talking to Darren, I think I'm going to answer part of your question. We've only had maybe 3 or 4 seasons that he can remember where the harvest was so bad that workers weren't able to make money at piece rate. And so we paid them hourly rate entirely. I don't know if that's answering your question at all.
Was that $7.25 an hour? Was that what?
Yeah, because we haven't had a bad harvest like that in years. I mean, a decade.
Right,
so whatever the minimum wage was at that time, that would have been the rate.
Right. Holly, are you referring to the federal minimum wage, or that you gave them the state minimum wage?
I would assume it was the federal minimum wage.
Got it.
I have to ask. I mean, I'll ask Darren that, but I would assume it's the federal minimum wage.
Thank you. Let me take Penny's question.
Okay, it's not necessarily a question. It's kind of highlighting something that Heather alluded to, which is exactly one of the reasons that we all as an industry need to and farmers need to come together, is her comment relative to why should we carve out a sector or a part of the industry and to be different, or that's what I assume where she was going. That's exactly what we need to be doing, is looking at the characteristics of agriculture and how we need to address compensation based on sector. I think that's what we're trying to do. I have another whole set of comments that probably don't fit with this with this part of our discussion, but I think Heather highlighted one of the exact reasons we need to come together and look at the sectors and determine what makes sense for them.
Thank you. One thing that I'm going to suggest is that just to keep us on time and have ample opportunity for our final agenda item, is to pivot to public comment to see who has an interest in sharing their thoughts. And before we do that, and I don't know if there will or how many people will want to do that, but one of the things that we'll be talking about at the last agenda item is how do we get as transparent, candid feedback from farmers, from agricultural workers. And so what I probably should have done from the start, from the first meeting, is to get a gauge on the attendees, the non-committee members on the call, how many are farmers and how many are farm workers. And if we could just briefly have a show of hands, if there are farmers on listening in, it just could be helpful for the committee to see how much engagement there is there at the moment. So if you're able to raise your hands briefly, we have one. Okay, two, great. All right, thank you. And then any farm workers that are able to join us today, understanding that they're farmers will work very hard on their farms as well. So the semantics are not great here, but okay, good. So one, thank you. All right, so just if there are individuals who would like to make a public comment, now would be the time if you want to raise your hand. Okay. All right. Then we'll move on to the last item. And I did want to flag that at the back of your packet were two public comments. Wanted to make sure you saw that so that they weren't buried as page 38 or 39. So we tried to highlight that in the cover email. Oh, sorry, there was a third. Thank you, Ashley Smith. Thanks. So why don't I turn it over to both Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner to take this piece.
Sure, happy to. Just wanting to make sure that Commissioner Fortman is able to join me on this one. So thank you for teeing this up, Jody. And first of all, I just also want to thank our colleagues from USDA for spending time being here today. I know that was a lot of data. We will be sharing Pam's helpful overview with all of you after this, and the real takeaway of there being a lot of resources out there, more resources than when we initially identified, and there are nuances and differences between them, the census and the survey being different outlets entirely. So thank you, Pam and King and others for being here. It's much appreciated, and we'll certainly be reaching back out if there's any follow-up questions. Jody, mentioned that we've been thinking very carefully about wanting to, as a committee, hear from as many voices as possible. And how do we do that in the remaining time that we have? We've had some conversation in prior meetings where we talked about possibly having different gatherings or different times and whatnot, but we thought we needed to maybe take it one step further. And so we're sharing what we believe to be a positive step forward in the next few weeks to try and, again, gather as much information from all parties in a manner that is respectful and will help augment the work that we're doing here. So Commissioner Fortman, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. As Deputy Commissioner McBrady said, we've been, doing our best to try to listen to not only the members of this committee, but also solicit comments and input from a variety of folks. And we have heard, we didn't hear it today, but at other meetings, we heard very clearly that farmers wanted to make sure their voices were heard, and the absence of farm workers was also creating a void and a question. So in conversations and based on feedback that we've received, we want to make sure that we have a process for soliciting and receiving those critical viewpoints. I mean, I think everyone on this committee is doing a great job in trying to provide information, and we still need to hear directly from the people who are most impacted by this. So to do that, we are creating 2 subcommittees. Deputy Commissioner McBrady has agreed to kind of lead a committee to solicit direct input from farmers, and we'll pull together a team to help her gather that input. And I will focus on getting input from farm workers. And I would, I would like to solicit the help and the support on that subcommittee from both Mano a Mano and Pine Tree Legal Assistance, because I think the 2 of your organizations are the organizations that have the most direct contact with farm workers, in addition to the work that some of the team here at the Maine Department of Labor does. I think Deputy Commissioner McBrady will use the expertise of people from the Farm Bureau, of course, you know, the Potato Board, the Wild Blueberry. I don't want to name everybody for you, Nancy. I'm sure you'll do it yourself. But the goal here is to really hone in on the voices of the people who are most directly impacted, and to have those meetings in a way that is creating an environment where people feel comfortable to provide that candid input and not feel as though they are being judged by what they're saying. We have heard that some folks feel that although they appreciate this very public forum, that they are hesitant to step forward and provide candid information to us as part of that process. So the goal would be we would have those meetings. We will each design our own particular process, but with the goal of getting those voices as part of it, and that we would come back and report to this group at the November 13th meeting, so that we would have some time to put something in place. And that when we report back, it will be high level, so that we would not identify particular people who provided the information, but rather an overview of what it is that we learned. And I think, and Eric has a question, and I think there may be other questions. And I think Nancy and I hate Zoom. I'm just saying it again. I hate technology. If we were in the same room, it would be really easy for Nancy and I to kind of bounce back and forth. But Nancy and I will both try to answer questions here. And Eric, I saw you were up first.
Before we take Eric, I just want to make sure that Nancy, you have an opportunity to share as well, if you have.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And I'm just going to put a little bit of a finer point on what Commissioner Fortman mentioned. So the subcommittee proposal that we'd like to pursue basically is going to allow for those 2 groups together to, I'm sorry, the individual subcommittees themselves are going to work to determine the best way to hold the meetings, the listening sessions, whatever this information collection effort would look like for that subcommittee. And there could be more than one convening between now and November 13th. We know that there are dynamics around just time and place that has we need to be we need to be aware of, excuse me. So I just want to make clear that we're trying to utilize these subcommittees in a way that is dynamic and flexible. And also that the farm worker subcommittee will be exactly that, farm workers and their representatives, that the farm employers and their representatives is exactly that, because we want these to be as comfortable and safe and open conversations as possible, where people can speak freely without a fear of judgment or confidence as being disregarded. Not to say that they would be, but again, just to be as comfortable as possible in these two particular environments. These meetings will not be public. That is allowed under the executive order. We are not doing that to try and be anything not public. I mean, these meetings right now on Zoom, et cetera, the written contributions people are putting forward, these are public, but we also know we're not hearing from as many people as we would like. Because the executive order does allow for us to have subcommittees to and also not to have some meetings be public, that we deem to be in the best interest of gathering information. As Commissioner Fortman also mentioned, we will not be reporting back to this committee saying so-and-so said this. That is not the point. What we will be reporting back to is common themes, concerns, ideas that we have heard, and we will be treating everyone in confidence who participates in these meetings that we're going to be setting up. Maybe that answered some questions, maybe it caused more questions, but I just wanted to make that very clear.
And Nancy, did you also care to speak at this time about organizations or farm organizations that you would be working closely with to identify those? Yeah.
Yes, as of right now, certainly had identified that Maine Farm Bureau, Maine Potato Board, Wild Blueberry Commission, Maine Dairy Industry, Passamaquoddy Wild would be invited to participate. You're certainly welcome not to if you didn't want to. And I do want to identify that MOFGA is in a unique position. You folks are represent farmers as well as farm workers, so we can talk about how we want to approach that.
Thank you. So I see 3 hands, and in this order: Eric, Penny, and then Tom, and then Speaker Talbot Ross. 4 hands.
Thank you, Jody. And perhaps after hearing Deputy Commissioner Brady's comments, this is conversation to be held within these subcommittees, but I just want to raise a point maybe for consideration by one of the subcommittees that I think that we have to be maybe careful about how we reach out and identify folks to provide input. That it's that there's an effort made to reach out into the entire group of, say, farm workers, the entire group of farm employers. For example, farm workers that come to Entry Legal are those that have had a bad experience. I'm not saying that there's no place for that, but I think we just have to make sure that there's an effort to get balanced representation for these additional opportunities for input.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Penny, go ahead.
I might have a couple of things. On Nancy, I would add the Small Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association to your list. I guess I would start out by saying, what question are we going to ask of these groups? What's the question? So that's one thing. But what I think about is, do we have a preconceived solution set that we're putting out there, that there is the assumption that if we were to say yes, align minimum wage was the main minimum wage, that it would sit under the wage and labor section that we have kind of been getting information on? Because I think Eric put forward a solution that could be pretty intriguing if we look at that as, go back to a statement I made a couple of weeks ago about, is that a section that could house wage for agricultural workers, and then not have the agricultural workers fall under the definition of employee. I tell you that there will be farmers who are still have a lot of angst about overtime is the next thing that will come down the road. So if we aren't demonstrating that we understand that people are looking at this as this, whatever recommendation we come out with, as a slippery slope, we need to make sure that we can somehow protect that slippery slope, or I would say protect ourselves from the slippery slope, and come out with recommendations that, and I go back to that, work for agriculture, because it is an industry with many characteristics. So first is, what's the question we're going to pose to people? It's my understanding that there's already some legislation being put forward around overtime. So once that word hits the street, I think your sessions with the farmers are going to get a bit testy at times. So, but I'm supportive of the fact that you're doing this and that we're going to go out and do some outreach. But I think we've got to know what is it we're going to ask, and what is the committee has not made a decision yet. So when people ask, what are we going to say?
Sure. Thank you, Penny. Nancy or Laura, do you want to have any reaction at all to that before I move on to other folks?
I
I
think
appreciate, I'm sorry, Nancy.
Go ahead,
go ahead.
Laura. Go ahead. No, you.
No, I was just going to say, I really appreciate the question, Penny, and I think we still have to frame it a little bit more as we're having the conversations. But I do think that since it is a subcommittee of this group, we are bound by the executive order and what our task was there. So that will be the kind of the framing of it. But I don't know, Nancy, anything?
I agree with you on that. I think that, again, the subcommittees will work to figure out the design and timing and structure of these conversations. But yes, this is an outflow of this group, which in turn is an outflow of the executive order, which was looking at minimum wage very specifically. We certainly understand that the legislative process is different, but we're trying to stay close to the real work of this committee, which was to assess what changes may or may not occur relative to subchapter 3 and minimum wage.
And right before I take both you, Tom, and Speaker Talbot Ross, just one thought for Nancy and Deputy Commissioner and Commissioner Fortman is some coordination between the two subcommittees, where you have some consistency in what you're asking or what approach, I think will be quite helpful. So I'm sure that will happen. So Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Jody. And this is a question for Commissioner Fortman. You mentioned in the subcommittee dealing with trying to get farm workers' lived experience voices heard. You mentioned Pine Tree, obviously, and Mano on Mano. Are you limiting it to that? If there are other committee members that would like to participate in that effort, are we able to? And are you open to other organizations that might have established contact with workers participating in that?
I'm always open to getting input from anyone, Tom. I think the goal here is to connect as much as possible with people who are connected to farm workers, and I'm happy to have anyone identify groups we should be talking to, but to get back to Eric's point, we want a broad swath of farm workers. And I think within the Maine Department of Labor, we do have some broader contacts through some of the work that we do as well with farm workers. So the goal is to utilize every avenue possible to make sure that we do get voices at the table. So That's a non-answer answer.
But you're open to suggestions or
Definitely.
communication. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Speaker Talbot Ross, did you, if somebody could make sure that they're muted, if everyone could make sure that they're on mute. And we might have lost the speaker by accident. She may have tried to, no, do we still have her? Where'd she go on my screen?
I'm here. You don't have to look at me. I don't think.
There you go. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just have one question and then a comment. And I just need to hear it very plainly. These subcommittees include members of this group, and so we would be choosing which subcommittee to be on, or is the DOL and the ACF doing this solo? It really wasn't clear.
Sorry for not being clear, and that's a great clarifying question, Speaker. Commissioner Fortman and I have self-selected, as of right now, the membership of the two subcommittees, essentially an employee subcommittee and an employer subcommittee, with some members of this committee participating in one or the other, but certainly open to feedback if others who have not been identified would like to be participatory.
And for those that would like to participate in both, should they let you know that as well?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now it begs another question around timing. What is the trajectory around timing for these conversations?
Want me to take that? Sure. So we had originally planned that our meeting would be on October 30th, and that the meeting after that would be 2 weeks later on November 13th. So what we thought made sense was to actually cancel the next meeting to give a chunk of time between now and November 13th for those two subgroups to meet to sort of format their, structure their process for soliciting input. So that's the timeline, and that the two co-chairs would come back at the November 13th meeting and report out.
So my last question / comment is, I think it was the Deputy Commissioner who made some remarks that, or maybe not, I can't remember, but around the fact that there were people within each one of these categories that don't trust this particular process or feel safe to talk, but they might in a subcommittee setting. I think that's what was alluded to. I'm just wondering why we think that there are farm workers particularly, and or some farmers who would then trust the subcommittee process. I mean, isn't it the same group of people that we're talking about communicating with one another? Or and so is the difference that it's a smaller group of people and it's not open to the public? But why, if they don't trust this process here, are they going to trust the exact same people in a different one? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's a very fair question, and I'll try and answer it carefully so I don't cause further confusion. I think that, speaking from my perspective of having been on this committee thus far, we have had quality conversation amongst members of this committee, and only a few members of the public who have been able to participate, because this sometimes occurs at a time that is not conducive to engaging, have been able to participate. So we're not hearing from a lot of people at all, outside of the specified committee members. And not only because of the timing and because it's either online and being recorded, or it's in a building in Augusta, we have heard, I have heard, and I've been told that some people might be intimidated about speaking in front of a large group. your point is well taken about a subcommittee of a smaller subset of people and whether or not that might inspire a different type of context or environment. Commissioner Fortman and I were hoping that it's not simply, you know, us and a few subcommittee members, but working with our respective subcommittees, working to reach out very broadly to get invitations out for these conversations to happen where they need to happen. Maybe they need to happen down east. Maybe they should happen in the county. Maybe they should happen in multiple places over the next 3 weeks. That by changing things up and allowing for these conversations to happen in these different settings, we would hopefully, with more people in attendance, that would engender conversation and sharing of perspectives in a way that this process to date hasn't. Whether or not we will be successful in that remains to be seen.
Commissioner Fortman, and then I might add something.
Yeah, and I would say, Madam Speaker, I think that although it's a different sector, when we talk about agriculture, when we talk about, in general, vulnerable workers, what at least my experience has been is that people are concerned that if they speak on the record, that there are going to be some sort of, they're anxious, whether or not it will happen or it won't, that there will be repercussions for them. And so I think that the goal is to, as Deputy Commissioner McBrady said, try to create as comfortable an environment as possible so that both farm workers and farmers can talk about their experiences and what they, in a way that allows us to have information that will inform the process. And again, it may not work. We talked the last time we met about just, should we do more Zoom meetings? Should we do more, different locations, different hours? We are trying to do everything that we can to get the best information that we can so that good decisions can be made. And this seemed like one avenue to try.
And this may simply already be clear, but I'm not certain that it is. So I'll just add that in thinking about this design, the idea of providing an opportunity strictly for farmers to speak with farmers or representatives of farmers and strictly having a meeting that is farm worker focused. That was the point, is to sort of separate out those two interests, which are in this issue at times in conflict with one another, so that there's sort of a safer space to, to voice your perspective. And when we looked at the committee members, the commissioner and deputy commissioner originally identified particular committee members that could likely be most helpful in that regard, because they're clearly representing farmers or clearly representing farm workers. So our hope, frankly, was that there probably wouldn't be a committee member that would participate in both, because in general, I think there may be, there might be an exception. Exactly. There might be an exception where, basically we want people in the room where you can have a high degree of confidence that you're going to make the participants feel more comfortable, not less. So that was sort of the overarching objective. I just want to flag both the time and also that since the public input period on the agenda has passed, there are 2 public members that have raised their hand, and I just want to get the commissioner and deputy commissioner's perspective as to whether we should take those at this time. Okay. All right. So I think it was Nolan Thompson who raised their hand first. So if you could unmute and go right ahead, and then we'll take Senator Timberlake. are you with us, Nolan?
Okay. Can
There
I
you
be
go.
heard now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
A couple of things. In reading the letter from Kelsey, it seemed that one of the things in general was to have more farm worker representation first. So just doing some outreach around that. And then the mistrust was one issue named by her for the possibility of having fewer farm workers as being a part. But the first thing was doing outreach. And then attached to that, I have there, I'm hearing there seems to be an assumption of fear and mistrust. And kind of where does that come from? What's the history? And I think in, again, broadening outreach, you're going to get folks who aren't afraid and may trust and really provide quite a voice for farm workers. They just haven't heard about this committee or otherwise. So I think, and between now and whenever that meeting is, really doing a push for outreach. And I think you'd be surprised by the number of folks who are ready and willing and unabashed about speaking too. So I just want to make sure that there isn't this whole underlying assumption that there's fear and mistrust. They're just people that just don't know about it. And once they know, you'd probably see more of a baseline of folks who are very willing to talk, very willing to advocate for themselves as well, once they are heard from. And then the final piece is I read the economic statement by the other letter that was attached. And it was interesting to read, but for all the economic analyses of that, the notion of minimum wage, I don't recall any of them pointing out that it did not help both the work of the company in some respects and community where people didn't spend their extra money. So just wondering if in general, there'll be some counter or supplemental comments made for people who just pass something out and then just leave it out there as if that were, all right, this is the truth now, that it does not help people. See you later, when that's not wholly the case. So those are my comments. And the other is, I know that it's not meant for the public, but can a member of the public attend one of those subcommittee meetings? One, because I've done a lot of questionnaires and questioning in the past, and I would love to have some input into what kind of questions you come up with. So if that's possible, I'd love to offer my expertise in that regard too, whether I attend the meeting or not. But I would love to be a part of the question generating effort. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Senator Timberlake. Give you a chance to unmute.
I'm trying.
There you go. We hear you.
There I go. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. And I've sat and listened to every one of your meetings so far, as you know, and I think the speaker and I are a little bit on the same wavelength here when it comes to this subcommittee thing. I'm very concerned about it. I'm very concerned about, I've been playing this game for 14 years now over at Augusta. And I'm very concerned about the way this is going. I don't know how you get farmers or the employees to respond to something that they don't even know what they're responding to yet, because you don't have anything for them to respond to. You haven't told me yet and I haven't never missed a meeting yet. You haven't told me yet what's proposed, what's not proposed, where we're at. So how do you respond to something unless you know what you're responding to? I think you're going to see more fear and mistrust in the proposal that has been laid forward. And I don't mean to pick on the commissioner or the deputy commissioner. I'm just very concerned that each group comes back with its own side of the story. And I think that that you always do better when everybody's in the room and we have the conversation. I've been doing this for a long time, and very, very concerned of what's being proposed here on the end. I will not lie. They're just totally concerned that we just don't have any proposal out there, so you can't respond to something you don't know what is there. So those are just my concerns. I really appreciate the time and the work that you folks are all putting into it. And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. I'm trying to put something forward at the end of the day that'll work or not work one way or the other. But I think it's important that we figure out where we're going first. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to ask the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner. We're at 3 o'clock. We're at 3:01, just how we want to wrap this up and follow up with the committee as a whole in response to questions, or just to make the committee know what's happening next. I think I'm going to just suggest that we at the moment, entirely up to you both, keep the October 30th meeting on the calendar for 24 hours, just so that there can be a brief follow-up of the planning team, and that we report back to the committee very soon as to what the plan is moving forward, likely in the direction that you've just laid out. But I just want to not have anybody delete that from their calendar immediately, so that we have an opportunity to talk first as a planning team. What's your thought?
I think I'm okay with holding it, Jody, but I don't think we're going to change the plan.
Yep.
I think there would have to be, I appreciate the comments that we heard, and the willingness of, the advice we were getting. I do think that we've also received really clear comments from workers and others, that having an opportunity to provide direct feedback is something that they want. And I believe that the executive order has directed us to get that feedback. And unless we have some other brilliant idea in the next 24 hours, I think that's the path, at least that I'm leaning very heavily toward pursuing. But
great, thank you. And let me give the last word to Nancy, and then we're going to cut us off because of what time it is.
Thank you. No, I agree with Commissioner Fortman. I do think that we will be thinking very seriously about the really good comments and feedback and concerns that you all conveyed. I just want to underscore that the intention here was to continue to try and solicit feedback on the process thus far, and where we are and where we might be going with the executive order relative to minimum wage and agricultural workers. That might be getting lost in the shuffle and hard to continue to underscore. So we will give that a lot of thought, and whatever additional thinkings we have, we will be sure to convey very clearly back to all members of this committee.
Great. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to let you all go out of our commitment to be keeping within our time constraints, and we'll be back in touch very quickly.
Thank you.
And
Thanks, everyone.